Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement interview, powered by SIG, and I'm your host, Philip Eidson. And today's show is part of a mini-series of 6 different episodes that I recorded all live at the recent SIG Fall Summit. And this being a live recording, you'll be sure to hear some background noises from baristas making coffee to venue employees taping wire to the carpet. Lots of different little noises in between. We actually had a booth set up in the main corridor of the conference venue, so you're sure to get the atmosphere from the event from those interviews. And so for this mini-series, I'm actually going to jump straight into the conversation. You'll hear me introduce the guest as we get going with the conversation. So with that being said, let's roll the tape. So hi everybody, and welcome to today's Art of Procurement interview. I'm here at the SIG Summit in Carlsbad in California, and I'm actually really happy to be joined by Lawrence Kane. Lawrence is a strategic sourcing and functional excellence lead for a Fortune 50 company. So Lawrence, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Phil. Nice to be here.
I'm delighted you could join me. And you have a little bit of a dual life, as I was doing a little bit of research on your background. I think it's fair to say, from a sourcing leader by day to a martial arts expert by night. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about the martial arts background, because I just love for listeners to get a little bit of a background into a guest and kind of understand what motivates them.
Sure. So I've actually I've done a whole bunch of variety of martial arts for about 45 years or so. Yeah. If I'd stuck with any one, I'd probably be pretty good at it. I am a black belt. I have used the martial arts both as a security supervisor part-time at a football stadium, or actually practical things like breaking up fights and whatnot, to teaching to other folks, learning, of course. And it's just been it's been a part of my life for a real long time. And I've leveraged that to write a bunch of books, and it's been really a fascinating experience. It does parallel my day job. It's not a totally separate, isolated
I was wondering
thing.
if there's like any connection, or if there's something you take from that you bring to your day job.
Well, let me give you an example. So, one of the things that anybody in sourcing and procurement does is you negotiate contracts. Yeah. And sometimes that can get kind of emotional, right? Well, if somebody on the other side of the table is yelling at me, I have a different reaction than a lot of folks do, because I've been shot at, I've been stabbed, I've had many, many fists that have connected with me in ways that I didn't like. And so, there's this whole, everybody has the sticks and stones may break my bones, right? Yeah. But people who have never experienced anything beyond maybe harsh language can get this adrenal dump along with words that is very similar to somebody who's actually trying to hurt you. Right. I don't get that adrenal dump. So I can be there and be calm and rational and really respond in a negotiation instead of reacting if other people are maybe losing their cool. And it makes me more effective because I stay away from the emotion of it, and I can just focus on what is the business need, what's the outcome, what am I trying to accomplish, what's my playbook, and I don't get drawn off into something that, isn't productive or isn't professional.
Yeah, you kind of maintain your focus. You mentioned emotion, and it's so right. Emotion plays such a huge role in anything that we do, but in how you react in negotiations.
Right, and you really want to respond, not react, right? And it's one of those things that's a little hard to do because, I've got a job, I've got targets, whoever we're negotiating with, she's got a job, she's got targets, and usually there's some win-win in there someplace, or at least some not lose. If you're talking vested, it really is a win-win. Yeah. But the path to getting there can be challenging, and especially if it's, there's a lot of, I do IT, right? So in IT, there's all these emerging companies, and being able to deal with somebody who's large, multinational, highly regulated, and very complex, like where I work, is very different than dealing with, some, smaller, kind of sort of regular sized company, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And so the folks who have from big companies are used to that, right? The folks from these startups and small emerging, niche technology, really interesting stuff kind of companies, a lot of them don't have that maturity and they're not really used to it. And it's kind of a struggle. And so there's a lot more emotion that can play out in those kind of things. Because like, hey, this is a potential premier client and I've told my boss I'm going to get this and it's going to help, our IPO is coming or whatever it is, right? And we're like, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes, we're a little high maintenance, as it were, because of the regulations we have to deal with and so on. So sometimes the process is a little different than people expect as well. And again, if I can be that calm voice of reason, and part of that is, to become a black belt, you're setting a goal. It's competency based, right? There's no participation trophy. Right. You actually have to be able to do stuff. You learn goal setting. You learn how to grind through stuff. You learn grit and determination. You learn inner calm, right? You learn, there's just so many things that you get growth-wise as a person that are so useful in my day job, right?
I'm sure it's hard to read you on the other side of the negotiating table.
It depends. I'm not a great actor, but I am very calm.
Yeah. I know that you've been at your current employer for 30 years, and that to me, I was always somebody who, I was in an organization for maybe 3, 4, 5 years at a time, and maybe things changed and I was seeking out different experiences. How have you been able to do that? I guess is my question. I wanted to ask it in a nicer way than that, but I mean, to me, it's really...
Well, no, it's a great question. And the difference is 30 years of experience versus 1 year of experience 30 times, right? We are in, I think, 38 states and 79 countries, give or take a couple. And our business is very, very broad and diverse. And so I started off in the defense side of the company. I was actually on a program it took a couple years to get a special access clearance for, one of those secret sauce things that I still can't talk about 30 years later. And then the wall came down and President Reagan canceled the program. And so my first move was, roughly 3 years in because the job went away. And then after that, I started finding new opportunities. And I've had a career in finance. I've had a career in engineering. I've had a career in IT. I've had a career in procurement and sourcing, and all within the same company. So while I've been there for 30 years, I haven't been doing the same thing.
It's been a very diverse set of experiences.
Yeah, and I've been really blessed because I've been able to move around and use my strengths to create stuff. Probably 75% of the jobs I've had didn't exist until I did them.
Right.
And so I've been able to create my own job, create my own organization, reorganize and change and grow other organizations. And it's really neat because it's so big you have that opportunity. Whereas if I was working for a smaller company, I probably would, like you said, I probably would have had to have left.
Gets pretty samey pretty quickly.
Yeah, because you always want challenges. You always want to grow. I'm the guy you want to solve the really hard things that other people can't figure out, because I really thrive on that. I'm not a very good run and maintain operational guy. I can do it, but I don't like it. So, that means movement. But in my case, it's been movement and growth in different fields in the same place, as opposed to just having to go to the companies. And the big benefit of that is, I actually get a pension.
Right. What's one of those?
I'm actually, yeah, exactly. But because everybody had pensions 30 years ago, right? Nowadays, nobody does.
Yeah.
I got a 401k too.
Right.
So, it's not like I would never go someplace else, but there's so many opportunities, I don't really need to go someplace else, you know what I mean?
You talked a lot about change and kind of being the first in the role, or creating roles and creating organizations around it. It's something that's obviously been with you throughout your entire kind of career journey.
Yeah.
What do you have like credos, or do you have a way of approaching something that's new, building something from the ground up that you really take to each one of those situations?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that really matter the most. First one is, how does this add value for the business? Meaning I have to understand the business, right? And if I understand the business and I understand how it adds value, then you don't get into this, look at this cool technology, or look at this thing I read about in some magazine or some trade publication. And let's go try it. It's no, here's how I'm actually creating something that's going to have a tangible result in a way that moves the company that's positive. And so I'm always trying to create value and get rid of unnecessary bureaucracy. We're very regulated, right? So you got to have some, but not the self-inflicted stuff. So, process improvement, lean engineering, lean manufacturing, change management, ripping out disparate systems and standardizing and coming up with one way of doing things that actually works as opposed to the one size fits all that doesn't, things like that. So it's really all about what is the value I can provide based upon my knowledge of the company and where it's heading and what its unmet business needs are. And then everything else kind of works itself out. And the only other piece, so that's the big one, right, is the why are you doing it? And then the second half of that is to be successful, you have to have empathy. You have to have people skills. You have to, emotionally engage folks so that they want to be part of the solution. If you tell them, yea, verily, thou shalt, and you don't explain why or where it's going, first off, you're probably going to get something suboptimal. You're probably going to get resistance. You might have a lot of people that hating on you, right? And you don't need that because what you do is you paint a compelling vision based upon understanding why we're doing this and the value it creates, and people get on board by themselves. People come and volunteer and stuff. It's one of the cool things about being old is
I don't think
get
you're that old.
Experience, and I mentor a lot of folks. And one of the cool things is if you really, mentoring somebody and actually not checking a box, but really being a champion for them. A lot of the way that people learn is experientially. So I can reach out to folks who I either currently mentor or used to, and say, hey, I've got this thing. Do you have a little extra bandwidth? How about helping? And so I've got this really big network of folks who it's like, well, gee, this guy was really helpful for me, kind of want to pay it forward. I can help other people. So it grows kind of a legacy. Or who say, hey, I kind of like you and I'll help you out. Or, wow, that's a great idea. Let me, and I don't have time to talk to so-and-so. And so it's, if you got that kind of connection of this is why it's good for the company and this is why it's good for us. And here's how you see yourself in the future. And that sort of thing, change management, even complex change management isn't all that hard. Now, I've really made that's a 10,000 foot level kind of answer, right? There's a lot of detail. But the point is that you've got this compelling idea, you tell the story, you engage people where they live, and you bring them along with you.
In the role that you have, especially when I think about functional excellence and driving excellence essentially in procurement, I'm sure that you get pitched a lot of things. You go to events like this to learn what's going on in our industry. And there's a lot of hype, but there's also a lot of things that are happening in reality. How do you kind of figure out, this might be something that is interesting today, and maybe that's not really ready for prime time yet?
That's a great question and actually pretty insightful. What I've found is there's a lot of people who are in sourcing and procurement who are really, really good at that. And there's a lot of people who, in the case, I'm responsible for IT. So a lot of people in IT who are really, really good at that. You need to be actually pretty adept at both. And so I have kind of a business mentor, somebody who helps me understand where the company is going and navigating all the relationships and networks and who makes decisions and that sort of thing. And I have a technology mentor who is, the guy's got several hundred patents. He's a PhD, right? So who helps me understand, because let's face it, if you have a degree in information systems or information technology and you graduate today, 3 months from now, it's probably obsolete. 3 years from now, it's definitely obsolete, right? And I'm joking a little, but not completely.
The speed of change is so fast.
Exactly. So you have to know and have a network of people who understand whatever it is you're going to go buy or do sourcing strategies for, whatever it is, and be able to understand from the people who are the super deep technical experts enough to be able to really have an intelligent conversation with a provider. And I don't have to be the world's greatest technical expert, but I have to know enough to see what's real and what's not real. And I have to have a pretty good level of skepticism, kind of a BS meter that works, right? And so when I go to conferences, I go to sourcing or procurement conferences to see what's where's our industry going and what's new and innovative and so on. and I participate in a couple of boards, which makes that pretty easy.
Yeah.
But I also make sure that at least every couple of years I go to an IT conference as well, and I see all that kind of thing, as well as having technical mentors. So I may not be the sharpest guy in IT, but I know enough about it to be pretty dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And that is a huge help, because I now know what I know, and I know when I need to go ask somebody who's smarter than me.
You know what you don't know.
Right.
Do you feel that, and maybe this isn't you personally, maybe this is more of a general procurement kind of talent question, but do you feel that we need to know more about supply markets than our stakeholders, so that we're actually bringing something to them of value in terms of how they think about maybe innovations that are happening on the outside that they're not aware of themselves? So there's some level of value over and above, hey, I'm really good at helping you run a process.
So I think it really, great question. I think it really depends on the organization. Yeah. So, in our case, we have, I'm trying to not say the name of the company I work for, as you can probably tell, but we're
got world leaders in everything you do.
We're somewhere in the top 10 in the number of patents that we put out every year. Yeah. We've created technologies that people think are cutting edge today, years ago, say under DARPA contracts and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So that's not really so necessary here. My role with that is more helping steer those really, really smart technical people to say, how can that new cutting edge technology actually add business value, as opposed to just being some cool whiz bang thing. If you're in a smaller company and or a less technically savvy company, it can be really big, but if you're somebody in sourcing and procurement where you don't have that enterprise architecture and the technical leadership teams and things like that, where you got those smartest people in the world, and you're trying to buy the smartest people in the world kind of thing, then you really need to know about it. And if I was in a role like that, I'd probably be going to IT conferences as much, if not more, than procurement ones. Yeah. Right? Because IT is changing a lot faster than sourcing and procurement is. We think about it, probably say late 90s, early 2000s. Up until then, it was generally the big one-size-fits-all giant contracts. Mm-hmm. Then we kind of shifted to multi-sourcing. More recently, the big, kind of sea change thing is vested sourcing. Right. That's over 20-something years. Yeah. It's not like where we've gone from, a mainframe the size of a small house down to the same power as in your smartphone in, 3 weeks. Right. And I'm obviously exaggerating, but
the pace of change is much slower in what we do than it is in the IT space.
Exactly.
From a category perspective.
Oh, clearly. So, if you're a category leader, or if you're just a like a CPO or some kind of a leader in sourcing or procurement, CSO, whatever you are, you need to know enough about the technology to see where it provides an advantage for your company and ways you can use it to actually move the business. It's just that whole seat at the table thing. If I'm going to be a trusted advisor, I need to know the company well enough to understand what it's not doing well, what it can do better, where there's opportunities that maybe folks haven't thought of. And then I need to look at how my supply base and my supplier ecosystem can actually drive that. Right. And sometimes I want the innovation to come from my suppliers. Sometimes I want to own it. Yeah. And there's really good reasons for both of those, but you got to do the right thing for the right reason.
Yeah. And how can you best commercialize your supply base and your supply chain?
Right. And sometimes you want your suppliers to invest in you. Sometimes you want them to invent something for you. And maybe you don't want the IP because that's not really fair or affordable, but maybe you want your head start. Right. And say, hey, you can resell this, but give me a little time to use it first.
And we'll help you in these ways.
Exactly. Right. And there's a lot of things you can do to make a win-win if you really understand that. And the better your key and strategic kinds of suppliers understand you, and the better you understand where your company needs to go, you can really add a lot of value and kind of create I hate to use the word partnership because everybody says they're your partner, but you can kind of create a partnership.
Yeah, a true partnership rather than a partnership in name only.
Exactly. Right.
What I wanted to talk a little bit about today was, and this came, I was interested in talking about this specifically at the conference because you spoke on it in a workshop a couple of days ago, and it was around statement of works. And statement of works, obviously to procurement folks listening to it, it's something that they deal with day in, day out.
Right.
But some are better fit for purpose than others. And maybe I'll speak from personal experience as not to paint a broad brush across our entire profession, but I know that sometimes I didn't do a great job in putting in a statement of work that was really doing what it should have done because I had to move on to the next thing. You obviously work with statement of works. You teach about statement of works as well. What are some of the kind of common problems that you see that as a profession maybe we could do a little bit differently? Or better?
We all know statement of work's the heart of the contract because that's what you're buying.
Yeah.
And you may have SLAs to assure you're getting the value you expected, and you got terms and conditions and pricing and all that. But really, the statement of work is the key thing, whether you're buying some commodity thing or buying some complex service or whatever it is. And there's a sort of fundamental belief that's one of two things in most companies I've talked to or, kind of benchmarked, air quote, benchmarked with. And that is either sourcing or procurement organization owns the statement of work or all we do is negotiate it.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of times there's a business partner who writes the statement of work and I'm going to go get a contract in play. And I don't really care so much if it's any good or not because that's their problem.
Yeah. They're going to be managing the supplier when all is said and done.
Exactly, right? So if all I'm doing is negotiating and I'm handing it off, well, in my organization, we're doing the sourcing strategy and the vendor management. So we're doing the front and we're doing the end. And we actually partner with a procurement team who negotiates the deal. It's kind of a separation of powers thing, right? We got the checkbook, they got the authorization to sign a deal. Yeah. And we work hand in glove together. Well, in that case, actually, I have to have a good statement of work because I'm going to end up managing on the back end. And if I don't do it well, I pay the pain, right?
You're creating a rod for your own back.
Yeah, but I love that. That's a great, I'm going to use that. But the thing is, even if your RAA or RACI or however you just define responsibilities is not the statement of work, you still need to know if it's any good. And the reason is because to be a value-added, kind of a trusted advisor or business partner, whatever it is, let's face it, procurement is an overhead function, right? We don't, unless you're in a company that sells procurement, you need to earn your seat at the table every day. And part of that is sometimes saving the business partner from themselves. Mm-hmm. And so, well, I'm the business partner, if you're talking procurement, part of the reason the organization exists and the reason I created the organization way back in the day was because what we discovered was you get IT people who know a lot about IT and tell the supplier too much and prescribe the way they do it, which means now we've hired a best-in-breed supplier, not let them do what they're really good at. Yeah. Or, we end up with something where we think we know everything. There's actually another way or a better way or a more efficient way, or we don't allow the supplier to innovate or whatever the things are. I mean, it's the whole, what's the sweet spot? Yeah. Right. And so if you're negotiating it, you need to understand if it's good or not. If you're creating it, you really need to understand if it's good or not. And if you happen to have an organization, which a lot of folks do, where sourcing and procurement are all part of the same team, you can't really escape that. Right? So there's a ton of things that can go wrong with a statement of work. And I don't want to put people to sleep by listing them all off. But I will say that some of the things that you really need to be sure of is, what is your sourcing strategy? What does that drive your success to look like? And making sure the statement of work fits. So for example, if I'm buying a commodity, I might be specifying acceptance criteria and general requirements. Yeah. If I'm creating a vested deal, well, I'm actually going to put up what my business problem is. I'm going to craft that statement of work with my selected partner. Yeah. Those are two extremely different things, and you can't templatize that, right? You might have some categories you need to fill out, but really one of them is, I need a widget that does these 7 things, and it's got to be green in this shade, and it's got to show up next Wednesday at 3:00 versus, I'm going to solve some, I don't know, I'm going to write a request for partner and I'm going to solve world hunger. And we're going to find, how the heck do you write a statement of work for that? Yeah. And obviously, again, I'm being a little bit facetious, but
it's about what the outcome is, and you're asking them to solve difficult problems with you, and you don't necessarily know what the journey is going to be that you're going to take to help you solve that challenge.
Yeah, and if you're in IT, by the way, you need some flexibility, because let's say I write a 3 to 5 year contract. What are the chances that something changes during that 3 to 5 years? Very, very high. And so I need to be positioning myself and my supplier to not be at odds and, lawyers at 10 paces or something 3 years in or 2 years in. And so again, you're having to really make sure that we've said, what do we want? How do we measure success, not how to do it? Because if you have to tell the supplier how to do it, let's face it, they're probably the wrong supplier.
Right. How involved do you, or should we allow our suppliers to really shape what an SOW looks like? Because I've been places where it's been, and maybe this is when I've worked in organizations where it's been a leverage-driven approach, the power dynamics, all the things that I hate about, some of the things that maybe we've done in the past and continue to do, where we say, this is it, and there's no leeway because, I can force you to follow this. My personal opinion is that that's not really conducive to a good business relationship, but I know that we do it. I'm interested, should we be letting them really craft it with us, or does it depend on what you're actually buying?
Yeah, it really depends. So if you're a very mature, large organization, you have the capability to really write good quality stuff, you might do the verily thou shalt, show me a compliant bid. However, even if you're really the best in the world, I always recommend allowing for an alternate proposal process, which takes a little extra time, but it says, give me a compliant bid. Tell me what it costs to do what I've asked you to do. Right. And then if you saw something that you'd really like to change, show me the value of that alternative. Because I think I gave you exactly what I need. And I don't want more and I don't want less, but maybe there's something I haven't thought of.
I like
and
that.
So I allow the supplier to influence based upon the value of some derivation or deviation. On the other hand, if again, an invested deal, we better be collaborating together to architect the solution and turn it out into a statement of work. But from a normal, say, RFP kind of perspective, I really dislike allowing the supplier to write it for me because they're probably not in my best self-interest. But I really also dislike not taking any input. So I think there's a sweet spot in there somewhere, and it depends on kind of your level of risk tolerance and that sort of thing. But it's really about, I want preferably a win-win, or at least a not lose. I can't handle a win-lose, right? I mean, that's just a massive waste of everybody's time and resources, and it gets ugly, and
it's not sustainable.
I mean, and this is coming from a guy who enjoys getting punched in the face, because I like.
There's a winner and a loser.
I go out and I do spar with people. Okay, I get punched enough outside my job. I don't want it happening inside my job, and so I want to set people up for success, whether it's the internal group, my business partners, or my suppliers. I don't want to set up a situation where a couple years down the road it's just going to be a disaster and we have to start over again.
You mentioned vested deals a couple of times. Are you seeing more prevalence of those outcome-based win-win deals for the products, for the services that are truly material to your organization? One is, are you seeing them more and more? And two is, how are you convincing folks on the inside that that's actually a right way to go about thinking about contracting, because it's very different from what the traditional approach is.
The challenge with a vested deal is it takes a very high level of maturity as an organization to really be able to do it. And this is despite, you can go to the Vested Way website and it's all open source and you can download all the templates, you can read all the books. But let's face it, you have to be good at this and your supplier needs to be good at this. And it's not easy. We do very few of them, to be honest. However, the times when you really need it is when you have a compelling business need, you don't really know what it is that meets that business need, and you need the supplier to innovate. And somebody's tearing tape in the background, and I really hope that's not in the podcast.
Yeah, if you're wondering what the weird noise is, where we're here in the corridor of the venue, and I think they're picking.
That's what happens when you're standing in a lobby. But anyway, hopefully that's not as distracting to people listening as it is to me. But it really gets down to, do I need the supplier to innovate for me, or do I know the answer or a pretty good answer? And if I really need the supplier to help me figure it out, And I'm really trying to, this is not something where cost savings is the answer. It goes back to the sourcing strategy, right? If all I really care about is cost savings and on time and quality and safety and kind of the basic fundamental blocking and tackling stuff, I don't need that. But if we're starting to talk about, I want to transform my business in a way that I don't know how to do and I need a supplier to help me figure it out, you have to do it that way. And so what we do is up front, we talk about, we've got some gates, we call them procurement review boards. And the idea is before we go and solicit the marketplace, we get all the stakeholders who get a vote to agree this is the right thing to do. So we're going to go over the strategy. We're going to talk about statement of direction if there is one. We're going to talk about our approach, all of the parts and pieces that says, here's what we want to go out and buy. Here's what success looks like. Here's the method we're going to use to do it. Is it going to be a reverse auction? Is it going to be an RFP? Is it an RFQ? Is it whatever, right? And so that's where you make that decision with all the smart people, the stakeholders that says, are we doing the right thing? And if it doesn't work, what's the fallback? Because, you always manage your risks. The worst thing that happens with an RFS, if it completely falls apart, is you have to start over again with an RFP, and you can't use anybody's intellectual property to create the RFP, right? So you basically, your biggest risk is time.
Yeah, you wasted time and you starting again.
You waste a bunch of time and have to start over again. Is that going to be earth-shattering? Sometimes you need something fast enough with a firm enough deadline. I can't afford to take more time, so maybe even that's the right way to go. I'm not going to take the risk. Or maybe it doesn't really matter that much. I can just do an extension of the existing contract for a little while if I need to buy more time, and I'm going to make the investment to do it right. And here's how I'm going to set that up for success. And here's how I'm going to mitigate those risks from between now and, whatever. And so as long as you're managing, and it's really not risks, it's risk, issues, and opportunities, right? So in other words, if you have a good plan, you've got the smart people to figure out you're doing it right, and it turns out that vested is the best fit, you're going to naturally go do that because it is, in fact, the best fit. If it turns out something else is a better fit, if a traditional RFP is a better fit, great, you're going to do that. And so it's really more kind of fit for use, right? It's the right use case to go forward with. You never want to do everything, right? I'm not going to use a vested deal to go buy paper clips. That would be silly. And I doubt any paperclip manufacturer would even know what I'm talking about.
Probably not.
If I'm doing facilities management, integrate facilities management, that's kind of the standard way you contract in that space, right? And if you're not doing it, your supplier is probably going to look at you and go, I don't know if you're going to be a really great client. So it really depends on what you're doing. And you look at some of the really successful companies in IT, that's how they do all their subcontracting. And hey, if they're doing it with their supplier ecosystem, why couldn't they do it with you?
I know we're coming on time to wrap up, and I have a last question that ties back to statement of works, but also, you're obviously, as you lead, advise teams and build the functional excellence around procurement, it's probably something that you face a lot, and that's the over-engineering of statement of works. How can we stop over-engineering things? Because this 10, 20, 30 page statement of works for something that could be done in a page or two.
I almost hate to admit this, but I think our average statement of work's over 100 pages, and some of them are over 1,000. But it depends on what you're buying, right? And so, when you get really smart people and they're writing a contract, especially in IT, right? You want to be very precise. And the way you kind of avoid over engineering at the simplest level is tell the supplier what you want. Anything that talks about how has to buy its way in. I put air quotes around that. For example, if you've got export control ITAR regulations or HIPAA or something like that, you may have a requirement where you have to tell them how because there's some government regulation that says how, right? Okay, great. But if you don't need to tell them how, tell them what, and then tell them how you're going to measure success. Right? So you have a statement of work that describes what you want to buy. You have SLAs, SLOs, OLAs, whatever it happens to be, the appropriate metrics that says how I'm going to measure you, both what you're responsible for and end to end, because let's face it, end users care about end to end. And that way, it's really hard to overprescribe because I never describe how. Now, you could still get carried away with what. You could still over-engineer, say, an SLA. I want 27 nines of availability. okay, sure, that'll be $1 billion a minute
Right.
or whatever, right? But, so you can get silly, but the second step beyond making sure that you're focusing on the what and the only how is about measurement or where there's some requirement based on a regulation or whatever it happens to be, the other way that you help make sure you're not over-engineering it is you have a quality review. Have a team of smart people who aren't involved. There's no skin in the game.
Taking
who actually
the
know what
emotion
they're
out of it
doing.
again.
Yeah, take the emotion out of it and have some people who understand how to read a contract. Tell them, pretend you're the bidder.
Yeah.
Read this.
Yeah.
What did I do? What's weird, right? How does this tie to industry benchmarks? So especially in SLAs, you know what's standard in the industry if you go out and do a little asking. It's not that hard. You know kind of what's standard in the, assuming it's not a cutting edge technology, you kind of know what's standard in terms of the what you're buying anyway, right? So compare to the industry and get some folks to pretend they're the bidders before it actually goes to the bidders and say, what have I done that's going to make you add risk to your price?
Yeah.
Right? And if you have those conversations and you get some folks that say, have you thought about? And then you actually take it under advisement for real instead of just going, yeah, we thought about that.
Check the box.
Right. Then you tend to actually hit the sweet spot. And the other thing is, if you have a vendor management team, which most groups do, sometimes it's part of, like in our case, it's part of the same group, but sometimes it's a different one. Make sure those folks are involved in that conversation because they see what happens between the theory and the negotiation, all the legal stuff versus what actually happens on the street when you're actually working with the suppliers. Yeah. And they'll tell you, hey, you guys had this really neat idea about this statement of work and this SLA, and those 7 SLAs were perfect, but this one here, there actually is no way to measure that. And so during the last 5-year contract, we just ignored it. Why don't you not include it this time? And then that's a really simple, silly example. But if I'm paying for somebody to create and work through an SLA that I can't actually measure, I'm paying too much, right? So those kind of conversations really help. And you have to go in, you have to kind of take the ego out of it, have the open mind and say, yes, I did a lot of work to build this statement of work and to have this, procurement ready to go to the street. And if somebody sees something that's a problem, I want to know now before the suppliers get a hold of it. And all of a sudden we're talking to lawyers again.
Right. Well, Lawrence, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Hopefully for listeners, the taping and all the other noise of things being put up and taken down isn't too much of a distraction. I'll leave it to the magic of our audio engineer to take care of it.
Audio engineers are great. So happy to be here. And I will say, I'll just put in a quick little plug. If you are a member of SIG, since we're at the SIG conference, their resource center is fantastic. I actually have a deck in there where I did the statement of work training, and that's actually available to any SIG member, so you can go ahead and grab it. It also has my contact information in it. So as do I have a whole bunch of presentations that are in there. It's a great resource if you want to get better at this and see what other folks are doing and you do the good stuff they're doing and not do the bad stuff they're doing.
Right.
SIG's a great organization for that. Yeah, absolutely.
And what I'll also do in the show notes, I'll just include a link to your LinkedIn profile.
Okay, sure. Sounds good.
So people know who you are and how they can reach out and comment or otherwise. And that'll just be at artofprocurement.com/Lawrence Kane. That's artofprocurement.com/Lawrence Kane. So Lawrence, one final time, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.